I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. On most of the episodes of The Distiller, we talk to people about their jobs and how the work they do to pay the bills coincides with what they might consider meaningful work, how it fulfills their personal, spiritual, or creative needs while at the same time putting food on the table. But for a lot of people, the work they do isn't considered either meaningful or work by society. This is true for retirees, for the disabled, and in the case of today's guest, for stay-at-home parents. Liz McEwan is a stay-at-home mom who homeschools her 4 children. And as you'll hear, Liz is not necessarily your typical homeschool mom. Yes, she and her husband John are religious people, but they're far from the fundamentalist stereotypes that often get associated with homeschoolers. And Liz is far from whatever stereotypes you might assign to stay-at-home moms. Or maybe she's not. Maybe there's no such thing. I loved speaking with Liz about her orientation to ideas of work and value. We talked at length about the mechanics of homeschooling 4 kids and about the choices and sacrifices involved in doing so. My favorite part of our conversation was hearing Liz talk about her conception of the value of work and her relationship with our cultural norms around occupation and vocation. Liz is thoughtful, genuine, and informed. She's not towing anybody's party line, and I love that about her. Liz and I met on a hot Tuesday afternoon in June at Sundry and Vice, a beautiful apothecary-themed craft cocktail bar in Cincinnati's historic Over-the-Rhine neighborhood. Over a Hefeweizen for Liz and an old-fashioned for me, we settled in and talked about what meaningful work means for a stay-at-home mom without a, air quotes, job. Here's my conversation with Liz McEwan on The Distiller. The Distiller's podcast about meaningful work, how we find meaning in the work we do, how we find meaningful work ourselves. Part of that discussion has to be that there are certain ways that we define work that leave other people out. And I particularly wanted to talk to you as the beginning of trying to get those voices into the podcast. So you are a stay-at-home mom. There's lots of potentially negative words around that. Homemaker, homeschooling mom. But you are someone who has made a decision, who has been in the professional world and has made a decision to stay home and spend at least a few years of your life finding meaning in the time that you spend with your kids. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what happened before that. And we don't need to do a whole big context setting thing, but tell people a little bit about what you did leading up to the decision to stay home and to leave the workforce.
Sure. Well, fresh out of college, I was relatively aimless professionally. And I ended up moving to Cincinnati, where I had little to no connections, apart from a boyfriend who lived here. And I ended up applying for AmeriCorps.
Right.
So I did AmeriCorps for 2 years. And I worked in environmental education.
Okay.
I worked at a nature center up in Price Hill.
Gotcha.
And I did, so it was education, teaching kids in the woods and school programs, but then also public programs, after school programs, things like that. And after those 2 years were up, I looked into other nonprofit sector jobs.
Yep.
Ended up working at Keep Cincinnati Beautiful after that, and started in education as well. And my background academically was not in education, but
what's your degree in?
Worship arts.
Okay.
And
marketable skill.
Very marketable skill if you are going to work in a church.
Right. Yeah.
But fresh out of school, I knew that I was not ready or willing at the time to do that. And so I had all these skills in communication, and I had done some youth ministry, so I was really comfortable working with kids, and I loved being outdoors. So actually my first job at the nature center was really a good fit for me.
Right.
And then when I transitioned out of that, I looked into other, social work types of things, and ended up at Keep Cincinnati Beautiful, where I started in the education department, and I was teaching programs similar. And then I transitioned into a community organizing type of role, and worked organizing the Great American Cleanup in Cincinnati, which was this huge community cleanup event, thousands of volunteers throughout the course of the year. And a few years into my job there, my son was born.
Okay.
And I guess when we found out that we were pregnant, we were not very clear on what the plan was for my job.
Okay.
We didn't really talk about it much, but I think there was always this unspoken assumption that I did not intend to be working full-time once this baby was born, but that was about all.
Okay.
And then...
And would you say that was true of both of you?
Yeah.
Unspoken...
Yeah, well, we had, all these hypothetical conversations before we were married about what a family looked like to us. And that was sort of one of the underlying assumptions, was that if we had kids, which we intended to, that they would be raised by us at home,
right,
rather than outsourced elsewhere. So so when my son was born and I told my boss, I want to stay here, but there's just no way I'm going to be full-time. She was really understanding and actually super supportive of that. She had been like a career mom with 2 young kids, and she actually let me like bring a baby to work and, for as long as it was reasonable.
Right.
I went down to like super part-time, was working 2 or 3 days a week, and somehow found like really affordable, awesome childcare in my house during those 2 days. And I just never ended up going back full-time. And that was, it was never like a hard and fast rule that I communicated to my boss, but it was something that I think she kind of always understood, that I was not.
You weren't coming back. She
back.
wasn't holding the job for you.
And, I was part-time, so it wasn't like I had any benefits,
right,
in the wings or anything. But, yeah, so I just never went back full-time. And my job kind of transitioned into some different roles in the organization. That's kind of how the nonprofit world rolls. And I ended up doing, the last few years I was there, I was in a communications role. So I was doing all the website and social media and print media and things like that. So when I left officially, almost 2 years ago now, that was what I was doing. I was the communications manager.
Okay, so you have how many kids?
4.
All right, and they're how old?
9, 6, 4, and 18 months.
Okay, so you didn't immediately leave. You didn't say, first child's born, I'm out. Thanks, everybody. The oldest was 7, if I'm doing the math right-ish, when you left.
Yeah.
So you worked all through that time, sort of finding ways to make it work for you.
Yeah, it was anywhere from, like 12 hours a week at one point, to I think there were a few weeks where I'd be 24 hours or 32. And a lot of it depended on, the season, because the nature of the nonprofit was that it got busier during different seasons. And but yeah, no, I didn't transition out right away. And I think part of that was just out of necessity. Like we didn't have a plan for how that would work financially for our family. Right. And my husband also works in the nonprofit sector, so it's not like, he's got some super bougie job, that
right.
I could just quit and call it a day. So I think because we had no plan in place, and because I also had like a really awesome work situation, and my boss was really great about it, we just kind of let it slide for as long as it would. Mm-hmm. And by the time my son was, like you said, 7, and he was actually starting 2nd grade then, I guess, and I was homeschooling, and I thought, like, there's no way. I can do kindergarten, I can do 1st grade in 1 or 2 days a week, but there's just no way.
2nd, 3rd, 4th grade.
This isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And then I was expecting my 4th child, and I was like, there is no way I can raise 4 kids,
Yeah, but
and homeschool, and work out of the house, and be able to afford a babysitter that would actually be willing to watch these 4 kids 2 days a week.
But still, I mean, it's pretty amazing that you had 3 kids.
Yeah.
And we're still working. I mean, the 4th was obviously sort of like the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back.
And I think that, there's 3.5 years between my 3rd and 4th kid. And I think that was, I think we knew that we wanted a 4th, but I was like, how are we going to make this work logistically? Yeah. It's just, I just knew it wasn't possible without really forcing the situation, which was like, I either had to put them in school or I needed to stay home.
So prior to that decision, coming to that realization that like now's the time, how closely tied would you say your work was with your identity? You talk.
I loved my work,
and
I'm such an idealist that I don't think I've ever had a job that I was not proud of. And There was one year where I was like selling running shoes, which was really funny. But the year after college, I was selling running shoes at this sporting goods store. But, I was doing it as a means to an end. I had a boyfriend out of town, and I was playing a lot of music on the weekends, so it was the perfect job because it was flexible.
Right.
Apart from that, everything else I've ever done, I've been really excited about. And
You weren't super proud of the shoes?
I was really good at selling shoes, actually. But I started to feel really bad about selling somebody like $150 running shoes for their 12-year-old kid.
Right. That they're going to grow out of in 2 weeks.
But so anyway, all this is to say that I don't know that it's been as much of an identity thing for me as like a like an achievement thing or like a resume type of thing.
It hasn't been those things for you.
It has been those, not as much of an
Okay.
identity thing.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, it is funny, when you think about like meeting a stranger or being at a dinner party or a wedding and you meet somebody new. I mean, the first question is always, what do you do?
Right.
What's your job? And I will say that has gotten a lot more complicated, without a career or a job to hand off.
How do you answer it? Do you have a pat?
I usually say, what do I usually say? I mean, depending on who it is, I kind of try to feel it out. But I mean, usually just something like, I stay home with my 4 kids. We homeschool.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that opens up conversations and sometimes it shuts them down. But, it is what it is. So.
Do you feel now that you're fully into it, 4 kids, no matter how long that sort of transition took, you are homeschooling full-time in the city, 4 kids every day.
Yeah.
Number one, I feel like the majority of people listening won't have any idea what that involves. So maybe talk about that a little bit, because there are positive and negative perceptions out there. There are people that think homeschool, what a great choice for your kids. You're with them every day and that's wonderful and loving. And there are other people who are on the opposite end of the spectrum and might think about it negatively. Talk about the actual reality, apart from the politics and all of that. Talk about like curriculum choice and development and how much time you spend planning, how much of it is free form and you go with the flow, and how much of it is, I know what I want to do and I know how to keep the kids on track for what they need to learn this year.
Yeah. Well, one of the benefits, I think, of us starting homeschooling in the beginning was that when your kid is 5, 6 years old, there's not a whole lot that really needs to be done.
Yeah.
So our homeschooling has sort of evolved with my oldest son, which is awesome. So his first 2 years may have been a little janky, but he made it through. He was the guinea pig. But we don't follow a really set written curriculum. We have more of a sort of a guiding philosophy. So we follow like a loosely Charlotte Mason style of homeschooling, which I'm sure people could look up and figure out what that means. But
So for people that don't, I mean, if you were to ask me, I would say based on tertiary knowledge that there's some similarity with like a Montessori vibe. Is that true?
It's well, people most frequently compare it to like unschooling, even though it is not unschooling. It's not child-led and it's not based only on real life situations, but it's not based on really formal written curriculum.
Okay.
It's mostly based on an atmosphere of education in a home. And so it's more of like a holistic lifestyle education for a family. So it's not just a child with their work set aside from all their other responsibilities and daily occurrences. And so there's a lot of literature involved, a lot of reading, not a lot of writing, not a lot of like math worksheets. A lot is taught in conversation and
Practical
through
application.
literature, practical application. And then there's also a lot of like character and habit training. So especially with young kids, a lot of it is about daily rhythms, and teaching kids how to be attentive and responsible. And the academics do come into play, but they're not the primary goal of education.
Right.
So,
What would you say is the primary goal of education then?
as a parent or in like a broader sense, like the primary goal of
Both.
me as an educator?
I would say I would be interested in the answer to that from Charlotte Mason's perspective and from your perspective.
I will first say that I am not a purist.
Okay.
So I'm probably not the best person to get, Charlotte Mason's perspective from.
All right.
But
You're
my
a devotee.
understanding, and as far as I know, is that my goal as an educator is to set a feast for my family, for my children. And so the idea is that I present the highest quality and, most deep and helpful is not the word I'm thinking of, but that the things I set before my children are of the highest quality, so that they then are learning to consume them in a way that really like cultivates a love for life and learning and the world. And so it's less about academic standards and measures, more about really like giving a place where that like love for learning and natural curiosity for the world really comes to life, so that they can, it's like the lifelong learners, whatever. But
teach a man how to fish.
Yeah,
Cliche.
yeah. And how that, there are actual curriculums that you can purchase. And I've purchased a few things written, like a geography book written by Charlotte Mason, things like that. But I really hodgepodge a lot of other things. I use some classical curriculum. We do some other, a lot of it's just book lists. You just read these books with your family. And through the process of narration between your children, that's how you gauge their understanding and comprehension and their communication skills. And it has a lot less to do with book reports and things like that.
Yeah. How does assessment come in your approach and in that entire world?
Well, legally speaking, every state is different. And so in Ohio, thankfully, we live in a state where you don't have to do standardized testing for homeschoolers. You can opt into it, but instead of that, you can do portfolio reviews. Okay. So a licensed Ohio educator approves your portfolio at the end of the year and signs off that you've done, an acceptable amount of schoolwork for your child's capability, basically. So how we measure things, a lot of conversation back and forth with my kids. What do you remember from this story? In math, almost like word problem conversations. A lot of like checking whether or not my children have number sense, whether or not they understand how a number 25 works. How can you add to 25? How can you divide 25? What can you multiply to make 25? How can you multiply 25? How does this number work? That's more how math is taught rather than here's a worksheet. Show me what you know. And assessments in general are kind of a sticking point for a lot of homeschoolers. Yeah. People love them or they absolutely hate them. Yeah. Charlotte Mason folks tend to hate them because, we don't really believe that you can properly assess a child's, intellect based on a test or even one conversation.
Right on. Tell me a little bit about an average day. You and I are friends, like, even though I don't see you all that much, I see you on social media. I see you out with your kids in the neighborhood. You live in the city. You guys don't live in the suburbs. You live in Cincinnati in the neighborhood of Over the Rhine, which is the neighborhood that we're in right now, which is a very dense urban area. And I sense and know that that's by choice. Talk a little bit about the life that your kids lead on an average day. And I mean, literally the nitty gritty. When do you leave the house? When do you stay in the house? What do you do? What sorts of experiences are they getting that they don't know are learning?
Well, unlike some homeschool families, we are actually up and out of bed in the morning. Kids don't wear pajamas all day. We get up about 7:30, which is, according to some, a little late. But, the kids get dressed, they make their bed, we go down for breakfast. I tend to feed my kids breakfast, and then I send them into the other room while I kind of mentally prepare for the day. I make myself some coffee, I sit down, I get ready, and then I invite my kids into the kitchen for what we call like our morning basket time. which is our introduction to the day. And we pray for our day. We sometimes sing a hymn or two. We do some scripture memorization. But then we also do some music lessons. And so we'll do, like this year, I've been trying to teach my kids music theory through folk songs. So we have this book of folk music, and we did, like, This Land Is Your Land. But looking at sheet music, teaching my kids, how to read sheet music, what the notes mean, what the symbols mean, how to follow along, things like that. So we'll do music lessons. Sometimes we'll do a German lesson, which is hilarious because I don't actually speak German. But we're learning it together.
All right.
And what else do we do in the morning? That's usually what we cover in the morning. Then we'll take a break, give the kids a couple minutes to play. There's a lot of short lessons and lots of breaks involved in the day. And then we usually have like 2 series of lessons. One of them is like mostly independent work, and one of them would be mostly group work. And a lot of that really depends on the logistics of the day. Oftentimes, like when the baby is sleeping or something.
Right.
So, like when a baby's super young and they sleep all day, you do whatever you want to when it makes sense. But now, like my son takes an afternoon nap. So if we were doing school during the summer, we would save our group lessons for the afternoon. We would do our independent lessons in the morning because I don't have the attention to give to my kids in the morning.
Yep.
So anyway, the independent lessons are things like math, reading, copy work. So, like teaching spelling and penmanship, for example, is taught with actual pieces of literature, things that we're learning, maybe the scripture we're memorizing or a poem we've been reading. But that's what they do for copy work. So math, copy work, reading, and then that's usually it for the independent lessons. And so my 2 oldest kids will do those things mostly by themselves, with me kind of bouncing back and forth between them. And then we take a break. Usually if we're staying home for the day, they'll play outside. We have a neat little backyard. It's not much, but whatever. And they play out front as well. They play by themselves. I basically ignore them for a while. And sometimes they eat lunch outside. Sometimes they don't. And then the other set of lessons would be things like history and geography and science. And we do those all as a group because those are things that can be, cheered in the way you communicate. They don't have to be taught separately. And some of that stuff is done out of the house, and some of that stuff is done, if it's a nice day, we'll go to the park and we'll sit and we'll do our science lesson in the park. And then we end, after taking a long break as well in the afternoon, we do tea time a couple days a week. And that's when we do just like general reading literature, any good books that we're reading, or poetry lessons. Sometimes we'll do art study, like study an artist for a term. My husband tends to do the art lessons, so anything like hands-on, if they're learning how to paint or sculpt. My husband's the fine artist, so he handles all that, and that's done at night when he's home. Okay. But that's like what a day at home looks like. But one day a week we do a co-op school where the kids get dropped off for 4 hours, and they do some of those other like riches, poetry, and they're learning how to, like, the waltz, and poetry and music and dance and things like that. And then, so one day is co-op day. There's usually at least one day a week where we do like a thing around the neighborhood. We'll go to the library, just take the afternoon or take our lunch and go to the park for 3 hours, and play and walk around. But then we also take days to go outside the city. So we'll go on a hike for half the day or go to a museum, outside of the neighborhood.
And in those experiential times, are you thinking about it in terms of, you mentioned unschooling before, and for people that aren't familiar with that term, my understanding of that, I don't go super deep on it, is that life is the greatest educator, and that by exposing your children to life, they're going to live. And I think the positive and maybe negative perception of unschooling is that there is no curriculum, that they'll learn everything they need to know by being exposed to the world.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a beautifully utopian idea.
Oh, yes.
And also certain people are hearing that and just
It probably
being
works
horrified.
for like a few people.
Yeah.
I mean, it might work for a lot of people. But no, sometimes for example, hiking, right? I really love hiking. I love being out in the woods, especially fall and spring of every year. We spend a lot of time out in the woods as a family, and a lot of that time is intentional, but not scripted.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you go into it with an idea of here's what I'd like to accomplish?
Every once in a while, there might be a certain place that I know has like a really great section of mulberry trees. So we'll go there when I know the mulberries.
A lot of those around Cincinnati.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Or it's wildflower season, and so I know that this park has these really great wildflowers. Or if we're talking about birds, or we're talking about apples, or we're talking about So, like I said, intentional but not scripted. I'm not like walking around with a lesson. Oh, look at the oak tree, and But we do have a few
of the genus.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of really great books that sometimes I'll take along with us, so that if we're seated afterwards and we're having our lunch or a snack or something, I can at least pull them out for reference. Some tree I don't recognize, or something I'm not sure about. And same thing, with museums or local history. It might be intentional, like, hey, for example, we studied ancient history most of last year and then a little bit into this year. And I found out last year, that Pyramid Hill Sculpture Museum has this like ancient history museum. And so it has these like ancient sculptures. I had no idea they were there. And I mean, now granted, I took like 4 kids into this museum with these like ancient busts and the mosaics, and I'm thinking like these poor people think I'm nuts, but they did very well. But it was like, it was like history come alive.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. But that's
much
the
better
sort of
than
thing.
The textbook would have been.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that was intentional, But we also hung out in the park, and my husband did some, art lessons with the sculptures, and because he knows how to do that sort of thing, critiquing all the things, the big things.
I think the culturally negative perceptions of homeschooling, I think, come down broad brush in a couple of different areas. One is like generally kind of hippy dippy, like rainbow children. People are out there doing God knows what. The other is a more religious based, like spiritual education that ignores the realities of the world and science and history. You and John, your husband, are intellectual people. You're spiritual people, but you're and I'm sorry that I'm drawing a distinction between the two of these, but I feel like I need to culturally as well. You're people who value the arts. You're people who value intellectual discussion and intellectual rigor. Do you find that you get lumped in to negative perceptions a lot that you don't feel like you belong to? Or maybe the question is just how do you respond to me phrasing both of those?
Well, I think living in the city gives us a lot of credibility with people, intentionally or not. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that we couldn't, end up isolating our children and never exposing them to the world. I mean, you can still
Is that a fear?
Isolate yourself in the city. It's not a fear of mine, but I think it's a general fear of homeschool.
Yep. That lack of socialization.
Yeah. I've never felt really threatened by assumptions, I guess, of people.
Just period.
I'm sure I'm conscious of them, but I don't feel defensive. If anything, I feel like if you really believe in what you're doing and you feel really great about it, like, a better way to tell folks about that is not in defending yourself, but in just like living it out, the way that it is. And I think if that proves people wrong, then it does, and if not, then who cares? Yeah. And I think for some people, we are fanatics and we're fundamentalists, and some people probably do think we're, the conservative
stereotype.
Stereotype. And but I would say those people don't really know us or really understand us, and likewise the other side. For some people, we're like way too out in the world. And our children are like daily exposed to all sorts of crazy stuff, and
living in over the Rhine.
And that's how I would I mean, the whole urbanism and city living conversation is like a totally different bag. But I mean, I so buy that. Like, I buy urbanism and city living with all its difficulties and whatever. Like I said, that's another conversation. But like, because I so buy into that, I think that like homeschooling just comes alongside that so well. And if there's any place that you would want to teach your kids, it would be in a city, especially a small city that's like really accessible and where on a daily basis you can be engaged with it all.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, we don't neatly fit into any of those boxes. But I do feel, and I feel like kin with those people on all sides.
Yeah, there's a lot to be shared, a lot of crossover.
I feel like there is a lot that we have in common, and especially as homeschool gets more popular, there are so many different, niche homeschool circles that you really can find like your people, and I feel like we're starting to find those people who really fit into a box all entirely our own.
Yeah.
But like I said, I still do feel really like kin with a lot of those others as well.
So how does all of that, and there's a lot that we're leaving out. I mean, there's, tons of studies about what the work that homemakers do, that stay-at-home moms do, apart from the work of homeschooling.
We do not have a housekeeper.
Okay.
Nor a nanny for my baby.
Yeah.
I don't hire a wet nurse at night.
Right.
Yeah.
Which,
but anyway.
which is both, as you even said before, sort of an economic reality, and comes with sacrifices and benefits. I'm interested in what, if anything, that creates in terms of an understanding on your behalf of sort of where you fit in or don't fit into how the world values work, to how our culture values these things, and how much of that is conscious and how much of it you just slough off and don't actually care about participating in.
I mean, I think we're at like an interesting time in history where women have never felt more empowered to do something other than motherhood. And I think, I have all sorts of both popular and unpopular opinions about that. For me, it's really a mixed bag. Feminism and women's, rights and all this stuff. And but what I can say is that, I totally affirm the idea that women are more than mothers. So when it comes to the nitty gritty of what that looks like and what work looks like in this new age where you can do anything you want, I think, there are some people who are really fighting against the idea that motherhood is anything special, that it really is work that is worthy of, devotion. And then on the flip side, there are all these people that are like grasping for validation that like, yes, this is work. This is something that's worth doing and giving myself to. And, I think there's one error that we have in the way that we view women and work and motherhood and all that jazz is that like somewhere along the line, motherhood and this thing of like caring for your children or being the primary caregiver of your children became like something that was more an accessory to who we were rather than an identity, which I understand where that comes from because I understand like the frailty of that identity that's only built on motherhood, but I think what you do when you make the work of motherhood a side gig to your other career is that then those women who do choose to be a homemaker or a mother full-time or, which is not even really the right way to say it, but is that it sort of devalues the hard work that it really is. So, I do sometimes feel like I have to fight the need to like tell people, I swear, like I'm doing this all myself, like I'm not hiring help.
Right.
But I shouldn't even need to defend myself in that. Because so what if I would hire a housekeeper to do some of that work for me?
Yeah.
There'd be nothing wrong with that. That might be wise. I mean, heck, if you see my house, you'd probably say, maybe we should hire somebody.
We want to rethink
yeah,
that.
let's think this. But
No, I get what you're saying, though. I mean, I think there's I don't know that either of us are experts on gender studies and, the cultural discussion. Well, obviously you are. By either of us, I meant me and my drink. But obviously there's a sort of necessary reaction to cultural forces that have fairly aggressively attempted to keep women from doing anything that they wanted to do other than that.
Yeah.
So that's a necessary reaction to that. The side effect of that is, it has this negative impact on women who choose to do that out of a deep desire for that to actually be who they are, and that's part of the discussion. Like the discussion of how does the choices that you've made and are making in your life relate to your understanding of work informs a comprehensive understanding of work, which I think, over the course of having these discussions with people, sort of gaining this progressive realization that one of the things that comes out is that a lot of us are obsessed with this question, with the relationship between work and identity. And it's kind of cool that you are not. That the context of how you talk about this doesn't need to happen within the context of, well, my work is my identity and the lack of it is really troubling to me.
Well, and I will qualify this by saying that I do still pick up side work. I'm a freelance writer. I write on the side. It's sort of my couple hours a week gig when I have it. And, I sometimes wonder to myself, like, am I only doing this because I don't feel like I'm doing enough? Like, because I have to have that qualifier when I meet people that I'm a stay-at-home mom. Oh, but I also write on the side,
Yeah.
Because that validates me somehow in this world where motherhood is not enough. And I think, it's like a conscious second guessing myself, like what are my intentions in doing this?
Yeah.
I think, no, I love writing. I'm a writer. This, it's okay for me to be doing this.
Right. You get joy from that.
Exactly.
It's not something that you hate doing.
But it is a valid question. Like, what if for the rest of my life, all I could answer was I'm a mom. Like, that is it. This
Would you
is
be
what
okay
I do.
with that?
Would I be okay with that? And if not, why? Like, why is that not enough?
Yeah.
Like, what does that say about us as a culture if we're willing to validate a woman who becomes an elementary school teacher or who becomes a firefighter or a physician, but a woman who, takes 5 or 10 or 20 years of her life to stay home and care for her family is just not okay.
Yep.
And I feel like I've worked really hard to try to, not shame women who have not made that decision while also being able to validate that is what I see as like really a great move, a great decision. Because I don't only think that like I'm the only person on the planet that should be doing this. I do think that this is like a great thing for people to do,
Yeah. And you're not doing it under duress. You're not doing it because you have, I think some women do it because they feel shamed to not do it. They live in a tradition, whether it be a conservative religious tradition, whether it be a familial tradition that says, for whatever reason, no, this is the only thing that you're supposed to do. And if you don't love it enough to only do this, then there's something wrong with you.
Well, and I think there's also this idea that like not a misunderstanding, but this people believe that the women that are doing this, like they had no other option, or there was nothing better they could do at their time, or that they
didn't have the
were
skills
made
to do
for this,
anything
or,
else.
There's nothing better.
Right.
And sometimes I meet or I talk to friends who are kind of like, oh yeah, I'd love to teach my own kids. I just don't feel like I could do it. And I'm like, well, I don't feel like I can do it either.
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing this because I think I'm like the perfect person for the job. Like I believe in this, and that's why I do it. And I think that's why it comes back to the idea of work, because if we believe that motherhood and educating your kids and homemaking and all that stuff is like frivolous side work, then who gives a rip who does it? Like, hire it out, you know, assign it to somebody else. But if we believe that there's like something really important, life-giving for a family, for someone to be doing this, then it doesn't matter what else you could be doing. Like, you're still doing something important, something valuable, something that when you are, 50 years old and somebody asks you, so what'd you do with your professional career? You can say, like, screw my professional career. Like, I took care of my family.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that it's easy or that I ever feel like I'm qualified to do this. But I know I'm qualified because I have a family. And so I'm
Do you ever have second thoughts?
I have second thoughts. I mean, not necessarily. I think that if I could go back in time, I would probably do more preparation. I always knew that I wanted kids, but I was not the kind of woman to like dream or fantasize about my family. Like I've just never been that person. So as far as how that actually looked, to like get married and have kids and raise them, like I had no idea what that would look like. And so a lot of it really just has been like stumbling through it. I mean, especially financially. I mean, geez, like I think, and a lot of this is the sign of the times, I mean, the economy of our world is so different than it was when I was even a child that I think I just had no idea what it required to have, for example, like a primary breadwinner and a stay-at-home mom. Like financially, the economics of that, how does that work out? All that stuff's like such a mystery and takes a long time to work through and is really hard. So stuff like that, I don't second guess the decision. I think like I had no idea how complicated it was. And then also just educating kids. Like I'm not like, I love my children. I enjoy, most of what we do, but I am not like a particularly motherly person. Like there's a whole lot about parenting that I was not prepared for. And so like the daily,
I'm asking the question. You weren't necessarily a woman that like had grown up taking care of a whole bunch of kids. And then when it came to taking care of yours, you knew exactly what you were doing. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think I think I'm an intuitive person by nature. So I think thankfully I worked through a lot of those things. But yeah, I mean, it's full of surprises, especially as, I tend to be more of a introvert. I need a lot of time alone. Being home with four kids,
for you?
It's not going well. But then even complicating it further with having a husband. I mean, geez, my kids aren't my only,
Yep.
They aren't all that's there for me to, be with. And so, excuse me. So it's just, there's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah.
And so no, I don't regret the decision to do this. I think I just had no idea how ill-prepared I was for it, and thankfully it's all, kind of come together, at least with some semblance of peace. And
you said a couple of minutes ago, you were talking about, that this is a choice that a woman might make for 10 or 15 or 20 years of their lives. I think there's two things in that. Number one is that it isn't necessarily the choice that you will make forever. There may be a time where there's going to be a time where your kids are out of the house. I wonder if you think ahead to that time and think about any relationship to the work that you've done before in any intentional way. And then I guess the second thing is maybe an observation rather than a question, which is that this is not a question that men typically have to answer. We get to make our decisions about our careers uninterrupted, unless we are one of the few. There are an increasing number of men who decide to stay home with their kids. But it is still a particularly gendered question that I don't think it's possible to really sympathize or empathize with because we don't have to make it. That's just an observation, but I think it's important to hear you discuss these things because we just go on with our lives and don't understand it. But anyway, to the first part, like, what do you think about that in terms of the future? Do you think, do you have an ambition that you cultivate now for when that time comes? You clarified earlier that you haven't fully let go. That number one, it wasn't a hard start and stop. When you stopped working, like you have ever stopped
Yeah.
working, and that you continue to do stuff. So do you anticipate that there would be a time where you would just take on more of the kind of work that you're currently doing? Or do you look forward in any way intentionally to a time where you say, oh, I have an ambition that I want to do, and it will just have to wait until this time is over. But when it's over, there's this thing I want to do. You're also a songwriter, you're also a musician and recording artist. Like, I don't know how any of those things factor into at all, other than picking up the guitar for the kids these days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a lot of ambition, which is, creatively and academically and, occupationally. I mean, there are so many things that I would love to be doing now and in the future. And part of the struggle for me also with having like a fourth child was the thought that regardless of how reasonable it was for any of those things to play out, I knew that with every child you add a few years of commitment and attachment, and
sets the timeline
that I
back.
really had to be okay with that. And so when I think about the future, I do think that part of the reason why I keep writing is to keep, my chops up, so to speak. I'm not writing much music these days, but I'm still playing music at church and elsewhere, and folk music at home with the kids. But, when I look into the future, so much of my idea of success and achievement has really been shaped by having a family, and I'm still not really there. Like, I still really haven't accepted or like emotionally ascended to what I have cognitively ascended to, which is the idea that like my future can still be my family. When I send my kids off to college, if they go to college, which is a whole another conversation,
These days,
obviously, is like my goal is not to send them off into the world and never be a part of their lives again.
Yeah.
And
they're always going to be.
when I think about them being married, having children, raising those kids, they will be free to do whatever they want. But, if there is any way that I can help make that possible, I think that would be a great role to step into later in life. Not to be a babysitter for my kids every day, but, to say they want to educate their own kids, being able to help them in a tutor sort of situation, or
And having the experience to do
yeah,
that.
or for other families that aren't my own. I mean, when my kids, I've really leaned on the wisdom of other moms that have gone before me whose kids have now aged out of their homeschool, and they are the ones who are now helping people like me go through those first few years. And I think being able to mentor other people in a similar situation is probably something that I intend to do. Because we've also talked about like fostering and adopting in like a second season of our family, which is like a whole, oh man, that's a bag of worms. but say that becomes one of our next, endeavors as a family. I mean, that's a full-time, that's another commitment. That's, raising another set of kids.
Yeah.
So it may never end. Or, I love writing. I want to write. I would love to continue writing. I would love to take some more classes, some grad school classes. Or I don't know. I'm teaching this like songwriting workshop, which is, teaching is not the right word. It's more facilitating type of thing. But this is something I've never even considered doing, and I'm thinking like this is kind of cool, like being a facilitator for this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, my husband and I have also like tons of other crazy ideas about starting a school and opening a camp and whatever. I mean, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
Like a farm. I don't know. You want to buy a farm? So I have no idea what that future looks like. But
Okay.
I do know that, like I said, my paradigm of adult life is so different than it was. And I'm more willing to accept the idea that, like, maybe this is it. Like, maybe my family is the thing. And maybe, like, we have like a small family business that we, a contracting business we do on the side. And I'm like, this could morph and grow and change. And this could be like...
What have you had to let go for that to be the case? Like, what was true about your expectations and beliefs about yourself 10 years ago that isn't anymore?
I am Well, first of all, I'm not good at collaboration, just in general. So the idea of building something with someone else, I mean, this is like a perpetual struggle of marriage for me, not just parenting, is building something together. I think that, the future success of a family is not, me building this kingdom here
All
with
by
my
yourself,
kids,
right.
and but it's like this bigger picture that we're all building together. And for someone who really values independence, and I was the kid who never wanted to work in groups as school projects as a kid. I would rather do the work by myself.
You don't play well with others.
I don't play well with others. I really don't. And so, marriage is hard enough for me, let alone like building a family vision for the future is tricky. Because I really have other things that I think that I'm much more qualified for, or that I would do much better, or that I want to put my name on it by myself, I want it to be my name, not.
Yeah.
And that's something I've had to really die to, and, and that doesn't mean that there aren't things that I do by myself. I mean, there's plenty I do by myself, but that's just it's not the, I don't know, it's not going to be the pinnacle of my, whatever, I'm not going to retire by myself to Massachusetts, I'm gonna be building something else with other people. And
that says so much about you that sentence ended with Massachusetts.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, actually. I think I once took one of those tests. It was like, what city do you belong in? And it said Boston or something.
That both makes sense and is very telling about who you are.
Yeah.
What maybe last question, maybe last set of questions. What does all this do to your assessment of, because you're outside of what would be considered the mainstream of a typical understanding of work, which is why I wanted to talk to you about this. What does that do when you look back at the mainstream, or whatever it is that you want to call it? Like, what are your senses of the way that people are relating to this question that we're talking about on this podcast of meaningful work for yourself, and how you think about what's meaningful and what's not meaningful, and how you think of what the culture at large is conceptualizing as meaningful?
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a big question.
Because I'm such an idealist, and I think so much of what I do is really motivated by these bigger questions of mission and vision and values and all that stuff. I think good work has always been more important to me than anything else. And when I talk to people about what they do or what they're into, I try to be a lot more interested in like what it is that really motivates them, and what's really important to them. Like what are they building? What are they creating? What are they, and sometimes that is their work. Sometimes that's their occupation, and sometimes it's not. And, I wish we lived in a world where everyone could do something that was really important to them. And I know we don't, my husband works in affordable housing. I mean, he's doing really good work, but it is hard. And it takes...
John's a project manager for Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah, he's the field operations manager. Okay. And he's managing these, all these affordable housing projects, and it takes everything out of you. And if he didn't believe that it was good work, it would not be worth it. It's definitely not economically viable,
Which is the truth across the nonprofit spectrum.
Yeah, and so when I kind of look at my peers and what is motivating them to do their work, I get less and less interested in, who's making the most money, or moving up the ladder, or working toward retirement. I want to know like what good work they're doing. And like and I know plenty of people who are doing really lame work for their job, they're paying the bills with whatever they can do to pay the bills, but they've got this other thing that they really love.
The side hustle that
really gets them up in the morning and makes it worth it. And so I don't know, it's hard because you have to pay the bills, and I'm really sympathetic to people who are motivated by that sort of corporate, moving up, making money, comfortable retirement sort of paradigm. I get it. Like, I'm very sympathetic to that. But like, those are not the people that I want to spend time with, I'm sure they're lovely people, but it's a completely different paradigm of work. I'm much more interested in the guy who's like, burning himself out every day, doing whatever he needs to do to support his family so that they can like make this awesome brood of kids, or so that they can have this family side thing, or so that he can like build this thing in his garage, in the meantime, or that he has this dream for 30 years down the road. And and then just like pragmatically speaking, I love the idea of like vocational school and technical school, and I love this move from thinking that in the future we might be moving away from more college, that college is a necessity, and these I think liberal arts are great, but I love like reclaiming vocational schools for more than just the vocation itself, for what it really does to who we are, and the value of hard work and creating things with your hands. It's a big question, I guess.
No, and that is the answer. That's like those are the things that I'm thinking about in the podcast. Inherent within your answer is some of the unfortunate reality of our culture is that the guy you described who's raising his wonderful brood is burning himself out. Like, even the language that we all carry is that it doesn't seem to be possible to do both what you love and what is lucrative. Yeah. And that's not always true. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are either doing something lucrative that they love or who've convinced themselves that the lucrative thing is actually what they love. But there's way too much of that reality that in order to do something that you truly consider meaningful, it either has to be sought deeply within a work context that doesn't otherwise explicitly facilitate it, or that it has to be the side hustle. Yeah. Because the economic demands of sort of where our culture is at right now are that if you're going to have two people who work for nonprofits, or one person who works for a nonprofit and the other who stays home with the kids, that you're going to be on the lower end of the economic spectrum.
Well, and I think sacrifice is not something that is easy for any of us, and it's also not something that we were told to expect to have to do. Yeah. And I think you reach a point, as a young adult, or when you're looking at your career options, and you think, like, what are your priorities going to be for the future? And you prioritize what's important, and I think there are a lot of people who prioritize comfort and security, and there are a lot of people who prioritize ideals or creativity, or and I think being willing to admit that, like, the way that you're building your life and the work that you're finding is a balance between priorities. And in our family, this is what we've prioritized, and so we sacrifice some of these other creature comforts, or things that might make other parts of our lives easier for the sake of doing this thing. Yeah. And not everybody will have the same priority, and that's okay. It's different, it's a different paradigm of importance.
Well, it's valuable. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Taking the time to tell us about it. I really do. And our best to John and to your kids. And thanks for sharing your experience, because it's a valuable one and part of the whole picture.
Thank you.
This episode of The Distiller was recorded live at Sundry and Vice, located at 18 West 13th Street at the corner of 13th and Republic in the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood of Cincinnati, Ohio. Sundry and Vice blends West Coast cocktail ethos with apothecary history. It's a beautiful place, and we want to thank owners Julia Petiprin, Stuart King, and Ryan Rizzo for hosting this episode, and our bartender Joe for the fantastic old fashions. They were just the thing on a 95-degree afternoon in the city. You can visit thedistillerpodcast.com, where we have a link to Sundry and Vice's website. There you can see photos of their amazing space and a menu of their wonderful house cocktails. Thanks again so much to Liz McEwan for joining us on the show. As we mentioned, Liz is an extremely talented songwriter and singer in addition to everything else she does. And we have a link to Liz's website on our website where you can hear her beautiful songs. And I think you can even still buy her album. So please do so. She's great. Thanks, Liz. The Distiller is produced and recorded and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson, with co-production and booking from Terry Heist. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Our logo was designed by Scott Ryan, and our videos are by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. You can find The Distiller wherever you listen to podcasts and on our YouTube channel, where we have closed caption versions of our audio podcasts for the hearing impaired. Please subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released, and it would please us greatly if you'd rate and review The Distiller wherever you listen. Ratings are gold for a show like ours. They really do help us get the word out. And as always, you can download episodes and find information, including links, photos of the guests, a map of every show location, and you can get in touch with us all at thedistillerpodcast.com, or you can send us an email to mail@thedistillerpodcast.com. You can suggest people you think should be on the show to talk about their search for meaningful work, somewhere interesting we should record the show, or something interesting we should drink while doing it. And whether by email, on the website, or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we always love to hear from you. So until next time, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.